Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's ONOS technical steering team. Thomas couldn't join us; he's on leave, so I'm going to be chairing the TST. And today we're going to talk about two things: a policy framework application from Angelos Mimidis, and he's going to give an overview of the app and talk us a little bit more about it and give us an in detail presentation, and then a topic that have been discussed a little bit before, but we would like to bring it up again and start a discussion to maybe further end it next week. That is an ONOS App Store wiki page or an equivalent where we could register and let people know about existing applications that people can use on different versions of ONOS, because the reasoning is that we want something that tells people what we have, but is not only based on the ONOS repo or the ONOS App Samples repo, but is a list of applications that live anywhere with a GitHub link that you can download, build with whatever tool you want, maybe Maven, and then deploy on top of an existing ONOS. So I would start with the policy framework application, and then we could discuss the App Store idea. Angelos, I'm going to make you presenter if you want to share some slides.
Yeah, that will be great. Give me a second.
Sure. We can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Let me clean the clutter a bit and it should be fine. Okay, perfect. So yes, in the last year or so, at the Technical University of Denmark, we have been working in a European project called Next Generation Platform as a Service, NGPAS. Part of the work we did there was to create a network policy framework, which was developed, initially designed to be generic, but of course, at some point we had to decide on a technology, and we decided ONOS for that. So yeah, we managed to deploy a set of applications that all together form what we call the network policy framework. I will explain more details later. But the main motivation was that through its architecture, through the layer architecture of ONOS, you have a quite high level of abstraction when developing applications, which means you don't have to worry about the underlying technologies, the protocols and whatnot. However, when using ONOS, for users of ONOS, this doesn't translate very well. I mean, even still, when you are using ONOS, you still need to be aware of traffic flows, of technologies, of protocols and whatnot, which might make the use of ONOS from an administrator point of view at least a bit more clunky. ONOS intents are on the right direction for that, for like simplifying the use of ONOS. But as far as we understand, they are still somewhat limited. As from what I have seen so far, they are mostly connectivity intents until now. They haven't been expanded to cater for more capabilities. And this is why we decided to create something new. Of course, it's partially based on intents in some cases, but it's a bit at a higher level. So the idea is to provide this desired level of abstraction through policy-based network management. The idea being that administrators can define what they want from the network through policies, which policies are defined in a human-friendly format. Now we use JSON, and you have your values and your variables. And then the network policy framework will take care of receiving this policy request and then translating it into the concrete network actions that you need. Of course, in this process, the network policy framework, we will call other ONOS applications, which can be either core applications like the forwarding service, or depending on the policy, can be also higher level applications. For example, maybe to create an intent. The policy framework is based on two concepts. It has a policy model and a policy lifecycle. The use of the policy model allows the creation of policies of different types to be able to be exposed in, using the same format to the administrator. So regardless of which policy type you are talking about, all of them are based on what we call policy rules, and they are split into conditions and actions. This is taken from an RFC 3060, and slightly modified to fit our case. It's slightly simplified. The idea is that each policy maps to a policy rule, and a policy will be enforced when the conditions are met, which means that then you can enforce your actions. And you can have multiple conditions and multiple actions per policy. Then each policy type will have its own conditions and its own actions, so you can distinguish between the different policy types. And then in order to manage all the different policies that might be on the system of the network policy framework, we have a policy processing pipeline, which we call the policy lifecycle. All policies, when they are sent from the administrator to the policy framework, start in what we say the new state. It has just arrived, it hasn't been validated. The first step is what we call formal validation, which takes care of receiving the policy, checking the type of the policy, and making sure that the conditions and actions that are defined for this specific policy map the policy type. If they are not, the policy is deemed as not validated and is removed from the system. After a policy is formally validated, the next step is to check if it conflicts with any other policies that are in the system. At this time, in the development, we only check for conflicts between policies of the same type, because doing cross-policy type conflict validation can be a bit of a complex task. Anyway, when the system receives a formally validated policy now, it will check if it conflicts with other policies in the system of the same type. If they conflict, depending on the priorities, either the new policy or the conflicting policy that is already in the system will move to the pending state. What we do is the policy of the higher priority will remain in the system, and the other will go in pending state, which means it will be not being enforced in the network, but will be still in the system of the network policy framework if something changes in the future. If a policy is also conflict validated, the last step before it's enforced is to check if the context of the network state can accommodate it. For example, if you have a policy that says connect host A to host B and host A doesn't exist, then you can assure that this policy cannot be enforced at that point, since the endpoint doesn't exist. So you also will put this policy in pending state. And policy in pending state, whenever there is a change either in the network or in the policies that are in the system, will be evaluated again, and they might be activated or not, enforced or not. And at any point in the life cycle of the policy, the administrator can request the removal of a policy, either doesn't matter if it's in a pending state or in enforced state, and this will completely flush it from the system. And in addition, the administrator can request the activation and deactivation of policies, and this will force them to go in pending state regardless of if they are conflict or context validated. So you can have an activated policy and move it to the pending system for a duration of time. So this is more or less what comprises the network policy framework from a design point of view, from how we thought about it. So the next slide is about the architecture with regards to ONOS. We opted to go for a disaggregated architecture in which we have a central hub, a policy manager. This is the central point to which administrators can come, use a dedicated REST API, and issue requests for policies. So you can come here and say, okay, I want to activate a new policy, I want to deactivate a policy, or I want to delete a policy, or I want to retrieve statistics about the policies that are already in my system. But each individual policy type, being, for example, connectivity policy, firewall policy, these are some proof of concepts we have created. The individual policy type has its own application. This has the benefit that while the system is running, developers and administrators can create new policy types and install them in the system without disrupting how the network is operating. And when you remove a policy type, it takes care of cleaning up itself. So it will remove all policy rules from the network that are associated with policy types with policies of the policy type you removed. So while the policy manager receives the requests, keeps track of all the policies, and communicates through dedicated REST APIs with all the individual policy type application, each policy type application will be responsible for validating the policy in terms of formal validation and context validation, since these are validations that are specific to this policy type. Yeah, as I mentioned, that the benefit of this is that you have a much more modular and scalable architecture with regards to the policy framework, since you can ad hoc create your own policy types without necessarily the need to know the internals on the policy framework. You can just take as a template an existing policy, see which functions need to be implemented, and then implement your own policy type. At this point, we have implemented 3 proof of concept policy types. So we have a connectivity policy type. This is just a wrapper around intents. So it just uses intents on the backend. And by defining 2 host identifiers as conditions, for example, 2 IPs, it will create a flow path between these 2 IPs. If any of the hosts does not exist, then this policy will fail in terms of context validation, since there cannot be a path between them. We also create a firewall policy. For this policy, for conditions, you provide a set of traffic headers, which can be from IP to MAC to TCP ports and whatever. And if you put as a condition that you want to block traffic, it will install block rules for this specific traffic flow. If you also define specific hosts, then the policy will take care of installing the flows as close to the host as possible, so that the flow is dropped closer to the source. If no hosts or specific endpoints are defined, then the block rule will be propagated throughout the whole network. And finally, we create a NAT policy, which just takes as arguments 2 IPs, and it will translate whatever traffic has source IP A to source IP B. So that's more or less the role of this policy type. So why I wanted to take part in the TST was to see if there is any interest from the ONOS community for us to provide this as open source. The code is readily available if you request it. We have tried to follow the guidelines of ONOS for developing applications. So in theory, it should fly through the tests. And we also have an accompanying document which gives a bit more in-depth detail of how new policy types can be created, how the policy framework works. So out of that, we could, in theory, make quite fast a wiki page for ONOS. That's all from me. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Angelos. I want to open it to the floor. If anybody has any thoughts, any questions about this, be glad to hear them. Okay, then. Personally, I think it's an interesting code, and it's an interesting concept, and I would love to have it in at least a public repo that can be referenced from ONOS and the ONOS wiki. Obviously, this would have to go through the code review process.
Yeah, of course.
I expect this to be a fairly heavy piece of code in terms of lines and implementation. Yes. So I would go for a phased approach of like putting it into a repo. First, I would make that wiki page available so people can read about it and like go through what exactly it does and more detail. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would start with, if possible, the interfaces of the classes and a few implementations. And once the interface is agreed upon, or at least commented and merged, I would go for the implementation, at least to divide it into like high level idea of what is going to be done through the interfaces, and then implementation. That once it is agreed on the high level interfaces, we could delve deeper into how it is implemented. Um, the question is, where should we put this? If either in the ONOS tree or in the ONOS App samples.
I we will prefer to have it in the ONOS App samples, since we understand that the core of ONOS is being cleaned up, it's being maintained a bit more strictly. So we don't mind having the policy as part of the side repository of the policy apps.
Okay, yeah, then that is, in my opinion, perfect. I think that would be the best solution. So yeah, I think the next steps are pretty clear. You could go ahead and make the wiki page, and once
Uh,
that is done, you could share it on the ONOS developers folder and start with submitting to the ONOS App samples repo the the initial interfaces, and then after those are merged, we could go ahead and review the implementation.
is there some document explaining the steps I should take in more detail? Because yeah, I'm a bit lost now.
Well, no, in the sense that it's fairly simple, like create a wiki page. There might be
No,
actually.
yeah, that is that's fairly simple. But what do you mean by first providing the interface and then the implementation?
Okay, yeah, then I'll send you an email about it. There should be a wiki
Okay,
page that explains these. But the idea is
perfect.
that first you submit the interfaces class, so not the implementation. Any
Mm-hmm.
just like not anything that clearly does the work. That's not for the first step. First is interfaces, because the interfaces are usually where the high level logic happens, in the sense that oh, there is this method that does X, and if one understands the interface, what it does maybe is not even needed from a like understanding perspective. You could understand the interface and say, okay, it does that, and also how it interacts with ONOS. It's clearly, and how you interact with the app. It's clearly through interfaces. So first step is the interface, because it's outwards facing, and those need to be agreed upon before going to the implementation details that are more lower level and are specific to your policy framework in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The the only complexity I see is that, as I mentioned, this is a set of applications. So you have the core application, which is the policy manager, and then you have the sidecar applications, which are the different policy types.
Okay.
We could also publish the different policy types, but the main idea behind creating this is that then other developers can come and create their own policy types without messing with the core framework.
Yeah, sure.
So.
So what we could do is even go for like one piece at a time. For example, let's start with the manager, and then let's pull in the different policy types in different iterations of the review, so people have time to take a look at the manager and then
Mm-hmm.
look at the policy types.
Yeah, completely understandable.
Um, okay, then yeah, I think this is the step to do it. Anybody has any thoughts, any questions, any comments? Oh, oh, come Carmelo can't use the mic and is asking if the contribution doesn't need to change the ONOS core, can it live in its own repo? What benefit does it gain by living in the ONOS apps? So,
yes, I mean, it could stay within its own repo. The idea was, though, by providing to the ONOS community to get it to be a bit more out in the user community, because if we just add it to our own private repo, it's most probably going to be lost and not be disseminated.
Sure. And Carmelo, I think that we are going to use the ONOS app samples repo in the sense that it's going to be completely detached from the ONOS core base, meaning that if you download the code, you're not going to get it. But there is an official app samples repo with a set of ONOS apps that you can download, and it's an official ONF repo under the ONF GitHub. I think you know it. And there we will have it, and thus will help disseminate, but it's still going to live outside the ONOS tree. Does that answer your question? Okay. The Carmelo's comment is that he doesn't think it's going to gain more visibility by living on sub samples, and it will add more burden on us and Angelos to maintain the code. Does anybody have an opinion on this? I think it could be useful to have it in the ONOS app samples, but since we basically do no maintenance of the ONOS app samples, it will still require Angelos to maintain the code, but it can also be fixed at a very specific version of ONOS, and if you want it, you can take it from that. Being an external application, I don't see this burdening us too much. Does anybody have any thought?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it being in app samples. But I don't see it being a real big maintenance for it.
Okay. Then I think that the ONOS app samples should be the repository where we put it in, and that also helps us to use Gerrit as a code review process, because otherwise this does not pass through any level of code review if it lives in its own repo. And obviously it would put a little bit burden on us to review the code, but I think it has value, so it's good that we can add a little bit of time to review the code and then have it in the ONOS app samples repo. Any other thoughts?
Perfect.
Okay. Then if not, I think that we have a pretty clear path ahead on what should be done. And I'll take back presentation rights from Angelos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. And in line to what we discussed before, like right now, on how to get proper exposure for an application and for something that was developed for ONOS. Both David Bainbridge and others in the mailing list floated the idea of having a wiki page which outlined all the apps that were made for ONOS and the specific version that were known to work with. That those apps could be internal to the ONOS tree, and that would be easy because we kind of expect them to work with master. Could be in ONOS app samples, as we were just discussing, and then the developers would be the ones making sure that work against the master branch. And but I would like to have this open for everybody who develops an app that is sitting in his own private GitHub repo somewhere that is not ONF related, to be capable of putting his link here a description of the app and the author and at least the ONOS version it was known to run on. So in order for this to gain a little bit more, for that application to gain a little bit more traction, and for us to discover unknown things that were done through ONOS. So that's my thought. I think the lowest approach could be a wiki page, but we could also go for something more complicated, which auto adds app. But I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? No?
Instead of having a wiki page, do you think it's possible to have something like like a Git book or something like we do for core guide, that people can actually make a pull request or review request if they want to change the list of apps? Let's say I'm an author, I write a new app, I want to kind of advertise my stuff. Then I can send a pull request or a review request, and then we can review this stuff and then merge them. And once that gets merged, it'll show up in the list and things like that. The thing I don't like wiki is that you don't really have this review procedure, and you don't really have this version control capability. So that's why I propose having something like a Git repository or something like we have for the core guide.
Yeah, I actually it's a very good idea. I like it, and I think it does prove valuable to have a versioned list, because not only things can go in, but things can go out, and this list would then be maintained on a per version basis. So if we know that an app doesn't work with a specific version, we could take it out of the list for that specific version. It would live inside probably the ONOS tree, or at least another repo that we could create. Um, and I think it's a first good step in making our documentation versionable and more accessible than the wiki. So I think it's a good idea. Yeah, we could do that. I don't know exactly how Cord does the publishing and all of that, but I think it's pretty easy. So I think we should be do. We
Yeah,
could,
or just a Git repo and use GitHub. Maybe just put it in the README and something like that. I know a lot of projects actually does that. Just create a README file and list everything in there, so you can do version control, and you can view the list on GitHub, or you can also use the way we publish Gitbook, like core guide. So we can also host that on our own in our own domain.
yeah, that's a great suggestion too. Anybody has any other thoughts?
I think Carmelo sent a message on the chat.
Okay, let me read that. I have the feeling that adding Angelos app to this wiki app store instead of the Apple samples repo would provide more visibility. Yeah, the idea is that you could put it in both. I mean, I was also interested in, or at least hoping that the review process could help Angelos and his team to have this app in a more usable way and with the code more streamlined through the review process. But yeah, I don't want to take the decision on my own.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a real strong opinion about where the app is. The biggest thing is for sure visibility. I think we have a major issue with visibility into a lot of different components of ONOS right now. But so I think it's the argument that Carmelo is making is justified, that if we solve the visibility problem, then we don't necessarily need to have it in app samples. But like you said, we also there are benefits beyond visibility in just going through the code review process and ensuring that we're helping people contribute and things like that. So I don't have any strong opinions either way. I think there are good arguments for both.
Okay, let's do this. I think we can. The effort of the app list is very minimal, and Angelos, why don't you start creating a wiki page? And the wiki page, if you already have this app on GitHub, please include it into the wiki page that you are creating, and let's take a look at the code, and then we can make an assessment on where it should live and what's the best option for us also to comment on it. Okay?
For the time being, it's on a private repo, but I can probably move it to my public repo. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, then yes, I would do this as a start. Create the wiki page and put a link to a public GitHub repo in there, and so we can take a look, and then we can decide if to leave it there or to move it to the ONOS App samples. I know a few members of the TST are not present, so I would like also them to comment on it and see where it leads. And then after we take a look, we can decide and pick the right place. Regarding the apps list, would you guys agree with author, app overview, GitHub link, and version?
When you say version, you mean the version of ONOS? What was said about the version of ONOS that with which applications are compatible? Is that the information that's going to be listed?
Yes, that was at least my thinking on when I say version, I think about the ONOS version because you know that, for example, somebody creates an app and it's a great app, but it works on let's say 1.14, and it was not yet ported to 2.0. So he can specify that, if you want to work with this app, you want to use ONOS version 1.14. That was just a thought.
That sounds good.
One idea could it also be that to work a bit more than like in a traditional app store, to also be able to download directly the executables instead of the source code, or in addition to the source code?
That's a great idea. Yeah, and we would ask to upload also a compiled version of the app in the repo, meaning the OAR file.
Exactly.
And provide the link not just to the repo of the app, but also to the OAR, which is going to be uploaded in the same repo. And thus, you could also just download the OAR and deploy it. That's a good suggestion. Thanks. Any other thoughts?
So if the App Store is a way to get more visibility into the code that's been contributed to ONOS, how are we going to give people visibility to the App Store? How are we going to make sure people are going to see it?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think the list could live inside the ONOS tree. That's a minor addition to the ONOS tree. And that provides versioning and all of that stuff because we release it with ONOS itself. It could grow a little bit long, but it's just one file, so at least that could be an option. And that could guarantee visibility because it's given with ONOS. So if you look inside the ONOS code, you'll find this list. Another option is
maybe we should just put it on the project website so people don't even need to download the code to see those lists.
yes. I was also coming to that. Another the why I did mention the wiki is that the wiki doesn't lives a little bit further separated from the code base, so you could access the wiki without accessing the code base. So I agree with Charles, we should put it also on the wiki, and it could be just a mirror of the README file in GitHub. And also on the project page, the onosproject.org page, to let people also, where there is the downloads section, maybe you can also have download an app list or something like that. I'm throwing the idea out, but yes.
That sounds good.
Tree, and I'm taking a few notes. I'll send maybe a recap email, and we need to decide if it's a README file or a build or a Git book, and then take the action of creating it. I can do that after the email is done. And, page. Okay. Any other thoughts? Oh, I see David just joined. Just give him a few seconds so he can maybe join. I'll give him a recap and see if he has any comments. Hey, David.
Hello.
We were just discussing the App Store /
Yep.
README page of existing ONOS applications. So the current consensus is that we're going to create a file that is going to be versionable either through a Git book in a separate repo or in the ONOS tree with a list of applications that are either inside the ONOS code base or outside the ONOS code base with the name, the author, the brief overview of the app, a link to the repo, a link to the OAR, so you can download an already built application, and the ONOS version, which is last known to work with. And that will live, let's say, in the ONOS tree to be versionable with the versions of ONOS, and mirrored to the ONOS wiki in order for it to be more visible, but also mirrored to the ONOS web page, onosproject.org web page, probably, so it gains more visibility also there.
Yeah, I heard part of the conversation. I guess my concern would be just, as I think someone expressed, keeping it in the ONOS source tree. I can see it, and I understand the need for versioning, but I would either put it in its own repo if you want to version it via Git, put it in its own repo, or use a different tool. I don't think we want them to have to check out all of ONOS to update essentially what becomes an app list.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we could still tie it to the ONOS releases, but having it in its own separate repo. That's fine by me.
Why does it have to be tied to the ONOS releases, I guess is my question.
Because I would like to have a periodic snapshot of it. But it can also not be tied and be at any given point in time you have this list, period.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the, if you just put it as a wiki that anybody can edit at any time, what's the harm in that, right?
Well, I think the whole point is that each app need to be associated with the version number of ONOS, right? This is the latest ONOS version is known to, the app can work on that ONOS version. And the app maintainer, which also need to be listed as part of that list, need to keep that updated from time to time, right? And if that's not updated and keeping the old ONOS version, everyone knows that, oh, this probably won't work with the latest ONOS, and it's fine, right?
Yeah, I agree, and there's likely desire to say, look, if no one's updated this entry in some time period, call it a year,
Yeah,
then yeah,
you can put it into an idle area, right?
right. You can do it. But again, I like the idea of kind of the anybody can go in and add their app anytime. Doesn't need to be a formal process. I worry that the minute you say you're going to put it in Git, that means, well, I guess they're going to have a login for the wiki if they're going to edit the wiki anyway.
And also the idea for us is that this would be going through Git would at least provide our level of control over what goes in the list, because otherwise we would maybe end up with having like random stuff in the list which we didn't even check. Instead, you're providing a bottleneck in Git by saying you have to submit it to Git, so you can kind of go in and check if the link works, if like those kind of things before merging it into the list. At least that's my opinion.
And that's, I guess I can get behind that. I would put it in a separate repo. I wouldn't make it part of the ONOS source distribution, because I think it's going to be released separately on its own cycle, and it's going to update, periodically, much more frequently perhaps than the ONOS itself.
Sure. I mean, I'm very much open to that. That's no problem.
I agree to that also.
Okay, then I'll send out an email, and I'll make sure to coordinate with probably Luca or Brian to create this new repo, where we would put this. Originally, it could just be a README file, formatted README file, and create an initial list of the apps that we know of, and let anybody contribute to it. Any other thoughts? Let me see if Carmelo wrote something in the chat. Sorry. Close it up. Okay, no. Then I would go. I would thank everybody for the great meeting. I think it was productive. Thank Angelos for the presentation and the great work you have done in your policy framework. I'll look forward to reviewing the wiki page you write and taking a look at the app. And then I'll start the discussion about the repo for the apps list, and I'll send out an email. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.